We need to talk. For words no husband wants to hear, especially when delivered with that particular tone, soft but determined, like someone who's rehearsed what comes next. I looked up from my laptop to find Sarah standing in the doorway of my home office, arms crossed, her posture suggesting both resolution and discomfort. "Sure," I said, closing my computer. "What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deliberate breath before crossing the room to sit in the armchair opposite my desk. The careful distance she maintained between us spoke volumes before she uttered another word. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about us, about where we are in our lives." She paused, her rehearsed speech momentarily derailed by the reality of delivery. "And I believe it would be best if we separated." Despite the bomb she'd just dropped, her tone remained measured, almost clinical. Sarah had always prided herself on being the rational one in our relationship, the one who could approach emotional situations with cool logic. 15 years of marriage had taught me to recognize when she was accessing that particular aspect of her personality. "Separated," I echoed, buying myself time while the initial shock reverberated through me. "That's quite a statement to make on a Tuesday evening. I know this seems sudden." "It does," I interrupted, studying her face carefully. "Considering we just renewed our vows for our 15th anniversary 3 months ago." Sarah had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I've been unhappy for a while, Greg. I've tried to make it work, but I think we've grown in different directions. We want different things from life now. And what is it you want that I'm not providing?" I asked, my tone matching her forced calm. "It's not about providing or not providing," she countered smoothly. "It's about fundamental compatibility. We're different people than we were when we married. I think we'd both be happier moving forward separately." I leaned back in my chair, allowing the silence to stretch between us. Sarah had always been uncomfortable with silence, preferring to fill conversational gaps with analysis and explanation. "Sure enough," she continued. "I want us to approach this maturely," she emphasized, uncrossing and recrossing her arms. "No drama, no ugly fighting. We can work this out like adults, make fair arrangements about the house, about Emma." The mention of our 12-year-old daughter sent a jolt through me sharper than the initial separation announcement. "And what exactly do you envision for Emma in this mature separation?" I asked, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. "We'd share custody, of course," Sarah replied quickly. "She's old enough to understand that sometimes relationships change. We'd explain that we both still love her, that this isn't her fault, all the appropriate messages." The clinical way she referenced our daughter, as if she were a logistical consideration rather than the center of both our worlds, triggered the first real flare of anger in my chest. But years as a corporate attorney had taught me the value of concealing emotional reactions during negotiations, which is exactly what this conversation had become. "I see," I said, maintaining a neutral expression. "And have you already consulted an attorney about these mature arrangements?" A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed Sarah's face before her composed mask returned. "I've had an initial consultation, yes. Just to understand the process. I thought it would be best to be informed before we had this conversation." "Very efficient," I noted. "And is there someone else involved in this decision?" "This isn't about another person, Greg," she said firmly. "This is about us not being right for each other anymore." The non-answer was answer enough. 15 years of marriage had taught me Sarah's tells, the slight lift of her chin when she was being evasive, the way she'd reframe a direct question rather than lie outright. My suspicions, which had been growing over the past few months despite my attempts to dismiss them, crystallized into certainty. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, deciding in that moment on my approach. "This is a lot to process. I think I need some time to think." "Of course," Sarah agreed, clearly relieved that I wasn't responding with the emotional outburst she'd perhaps anticipated. "Take whatever time you need. I was thinking I could stay with my sister for a few days, give you some space to process." Her sister lived 40 minutes away, conveniently in the same town where Sarah's law firm had recently opened a new office, staffed by a senior partner named James Harrington who had been mentoring Sarah extensively over the past 6 months. The same James Harrington who had called our home phone asking for Sarah 3 times in the past month during hours when she should have been in client meetings. "That sounds reasonable," I agreed. "When were you thinking of going?" "I packed a bag," she admitted. "I thought maybe tonight, if that's okay. Janet's expecting me." Of course she'd already arranged everything. Sarah had always been thorough in her planning, a quality I'd once admired. Now I wondered how long she'd been planning this particular exit. "And Emma?" "I thought she could stay here with you for now, maintain her routine. We can work out more formal arrangements once we've both had time to adjust to the new situation." Again, the reasonable tone, the mature approach. I nodded slowly. If you think that's best. She'll have questions, though. We can tell her together before I leave, Sarah suggested. Keep it simple, age-appropriate. Just that mom and dad need some time apart to figure things out. I agreed, and an hour later we sat with our confused, tearful daughter in the living room, delivering the carefully sanitized version of what was happening. Sarah maintained her composed demeanor throughout, though I noticed she avoided direct eye contact with Emma when promising that nothing would really change, that this was just a grown-up timeout. After Emma had retreated to her room, visibly shaken despite our reassurances, Sarah collected her pre-packed suitcase from our bedroom closet. I walked her to the door, maintaining the facade of civilized separation. I'll call tomorrow to check in on Emma, she said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. And maybe we can talk more about next steps once we've both had some time to think. Of course, I agreed. We'll handle this maturely, just like you want. Relief washed over her face. Thank you for understanding, Greg. I really do want this to be as painless as possible for everyone. As I watched her load her suitcase into her Audi and drive away, a cold clarity settled over me. Sarah wanted a mature, civilized divorce, one where she could claim the moral high ground while almost certainly pursuing her relationship with James Harrington without the inconvenience of being labeled the unfaithful spouse. What she didn't know was that my agreement to her mature approach wasn't acceptance, it was strategy. If there's one thing my years as an attorney specializing in high-stakes corporate litigation had taught me, it was that the party who controls the narrative and gathers the most intelligence before making their move usually wins. Sarah had made her opening gambit. Now it was my turn. I waited until I heard Emma's bedroom door close for the night before making my first call, not to a divorce attorney, but to Barrett Reynolds, a private investigator I'd worked with on several corporate cases. Barrett specialized in digital forensics and surveillance, skills that had proven invaluable in exposing corporate espionage and contractual violations. Tonight, those skills would serve a more personal purpose. It's Greg Mackenzie, I said when he answered. I need your services on a personal matter. Discreetly. Personal as in my wife is having an affair with her mentor at the law firm, and I need documentation before I file for divorce. Barrett didn't waste time with platitudes or expressions of sympathy. Electronic surveillance, physical surveillance, or both? Both. She's staying at her sister's place in Westbrook for a few days, but I suspect that's a cover. The man's name is James Harrington, senior partner at Caldwell and Bennett. Their new Westbrook office opened 6 months ago. I'll need access to your home systems, her devices if possible. Come by tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. My daughter will be at school. After ending the call, I went to my home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was a small fireproof box containing important documents, birth certificates, property deeds, insurance policies. Among them was a USB drive that Sarah knew nothing about. 6 months earlier, I'd noticed the first subtle changes in Sarah's behavior: unexplained late nights, sudden weekend work emergencies, increased password protection on her devices. I'd dismissed my concerns initially, telling myself that the new office opening was creating legitimate demands on her time. But when she began keeping her phone face down and taking calls in another room, the attorney in me had kicked in. I'd installed monitoring software on our home network and synced her phone to a cloud account I could access. I hadn't checked it in months, partly from respect for her privacy, partly from fear of what I might find. I'd almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. Now, I connected the drive to my laptop and began reviewing what the passive monitoring had collected. There weren't explicit messages, Sarah was too careful for that, but there were patterns. Late-night texts to a contact saved only as JH. Location data showing her at addresses that didn't match her claimed whereabouts. Calendar entries for meetings that didn't appear on her firm's official schedule. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions and give Barrett a starting point. I copied the relevant files to a new drive for him, then secured the original back in the lockbox. Next, I called my own law firm's controller, who owed me several favors after I'd helped her son avoid criminal charges in a complicated DUI case last year. Marjorie, I need a favor that stays between us. I need complete information about my financial situation, all accounts, investments, retirement funds, property holdings. Everything separate from Sarah's assets, everything jointly held. Greg, are you in some kind of trouble? Marjorie's concern was evident. Just doing some estate planning, I lied smoothly. I realized recently that I don't have a complete picture of our finances, and I'd like to get everything organized. I can have that for you tomorrow, she promised. My final call of the night was to my longtime friend and colleague, David Chen, who specialized in family law at a competing firm, a deliberate choice to avoid any conflict with Sarah's firm. "I need a recommendation for the best divorce attorney in the city," I said without preamble when he answered. "Someone ruthless but discreet." David didn't miss a beat. "Jessica Winters at Frost & Winters. She specializes in high-asset divorces with infidelity components. Want me to set up a meeting? Please. As soon as possible. Greg." David's voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry if this is about what I think it's about." "It is," I confirmed. "But don't be sorry. Be strategic." "Always," he promised. The next morning, after sending a visibly subdued Emma off to school with extra reassurances and a tight hug, I met with Barrett. He swept my house for any surveillance devices, finding none, then installed additional monitoring software on my home network and provided me with a secure phone for our communications. "I'll begin surveillance today," he assured me. "Digital first, then physical once I establish patterns. Give me a week for preliminary findings, though anything significant will come to you immediately." Jessica Winters was able to see me that same afternoon, a professional courtesy extended through David's connection. Her office exuded the same commanding presence she did, elegant but intimidating, designed to communicate power rather than comfort. "David briefed me on the basics," she said after introductions were complete. "Your wife has requested separation, you suspect infidelity, and you want to be prepared before responding to her proposal." "That's correct." "Smart," she approved. "Most clients come to me after they've already made critical errors in the early stages. Tell me about your financial situation, custody preferences, and what evidence you currently have of the affair." I laid out everything: our assets, substantial, thanks to both our legal careers and some fortunate investments, my absolute priority of protecting Emma, and the circumstantial evidence I'd gathered so far. "Barrett Reynolds is good," Jessica noted when I mentioned his involvement. "His evidence stands up in court because he's meticulous about chain of custody and legal boundaries. That said, Connecticut is a no-fault divorce state. Infidelity won't automatically entitle you to a more favorable settlement." "I understand. But it will impact how the court views her character, especially regarding custody arrangements, correct?" "Potentially, though not as much as you might hope. What will impact custody more significantly is demonstrating which parent has been the primary caregiver, who's more involved in the child's daily routine, and who can provide the most stable environment moving forward. That's been equally shared, though I've been more involved in Emma's school activities while Sarah has handled medical appointments and extracurriculars." Jessica made notes as I detailed our typical family routines. "Starting today, document everything you do for Emma. Every meal prepared, homework session supervised, emotional support provided during this transition. We want to establish that you're not just an involved father but the stable parent during a time when your wife has chosen to leave the family home." "And financially? Connecticut follows equitable distribution principles, not strictly 50-50ths. Factors include length of marriage, cause of breakdown, each party's contribution to acquisition of assets, and future financial needs. Your equal earning power works in our favor for arguing true equity, but we need to establish a complete financial picture before determining strategy." By the time I left Jessica's office, I had a clear action plan. While Barrett gathered evidence of Sarah's affair, I would focus on 3 priorities: documenting my role as Emma's caregiver, securing comprehensive financial information, and maintaining the appearance of cooperative civility with Sarah. That evening, Sarah called to check on Emma as promised. I put our daughter on speakerphone, both to demonstrate transparency and to ensure I heard exactly what Sarah told her. "I miss you, Mom," Emma said, her voice small in a way that made my chest ache. "I miss you too, sweetie. But it's just for a little while until Mom and Dad figure some things out." "How was school today?" The conversation continued with safe topics: schoolwork, friends, and upcoming science project. Sarah was warm and attentive, though I noticed she offered no timeline for her return or next visit. After Emma said goodbye and headed upstairs to finish homework, Sarah asked to speak with me. "How are you doing?" she asked, her tone carefully modulated to express appropriate concern without invitation for emotional intimacy. "Managing," I replied neutrally. "Emma's struggling, but I'm keeping her routine as normal as possible." "I appreciate that. I was thinking maybe I could take her to lunch this weekend? Saturday, maybe?" "That should be fine. We have her soccer game at 10, so maybe noon?" "Soccer," Sarah paused. "Right, I forgot about that. Noon works." I noted her lapse mentally. Emma had played soccer every Saturday morning for the past 3 years. It was a small detail, but telling about where Sarah's attention had been focused recently. Have you had time to think about our situation? She ventured after a moment. Some, I acknowledged. I think you're right that we should handle this maturely. I'll need some time to adjust to the idea, but I'm not interested in creating unnecessary conflict. The relief in her voice was palpable. That's really good to hear, Greg. Maybe next week we could meet with a mediator? Just to start discussing how we'll handle practical arrangements? Let's hold off on mediators for now, I suggested. Give ourselves time to process emotions before jumping into logistics. Of course, she agreed quickly. Whatever timeline works for you. After we hung up, I documented the conversation in the detailed log Jessica had instructed me to maintain, noting Sarah's forgotten awareness of Emma's soccer schedule and her push for mediation, likely hoping to secure a favorable settlement before I had time to consult proper representation. The next few days established our new pattern. I maintained my work schedule while adjusting to single parenting, making sure Emma's routine remained as stable as possible despite her mother's absence. Sarah called daily to check in, her conversations with Emma becoming increasingly strained as our daughter's initial shock evolved into hurt and confusion. On Friday evening, 3 days after Sarah's departure, I received the first substantive update from Barrett. The message was simple: preliminary digital evidence obtained, physical confirmation underway, meeting recommended. We met at a nondescript diner 20 miles from my home, where Barrett handed me a sealed envelope and a password-protected tablet. The envelope contains printed communications between your wife and James Harrington going back approximately 4 months, he explained. The tablet has more comprehensive digital evidence, including location tracking that places them at the Westbrook Grand Hotel on multiple occasions, most recently last night. I reviewed the materials carefully, my legal training allowing me to process the information with professional detachment despite the personal betrayal it represented. The messages weren't explicitly sexual, Sarah and James were both too careful for that, but the intimacy was unmistakable. References to our future, discussions about how and when to make changes, and arrangements for meetings disguised as work obligations painted a clear picture of an affair that had progressed well beyond the initial stages. This is good, I told Barrett, but we need more. Direct evidence rather than just circumstantial. I booked a room at the Westbrook Grand for tomorrow night, Barrett informed me. Based on their patterns, they typically meet there on Thursday and Saturday evenings. I'll have surveillance in place. Saturday arrived with its complex choreography. I took Emma to her soccer game in the morning, where she played with less enthusiasm than usual but still managed to score a goal. Sarah arrived at the field just before the final whistle, offering effusive praise for Emma's performance as if to compensate for her absence from the rest of the game. I maintained cordial interaction with Sarah during the handoff for their lunch date, even suggesting they take the afternoon for shopping afterward if Emma wanted. The generous gesture was both strategic and genuine. Emma needed quality time with her mother, and I needed Sarah to believe I was accepting our separation with mature resignation. While they were gone, I met again with Jessica Winters to review Barrett's initial evidence and our developing strategy. The digital trail is compelling, she noted. But direct evidence of the affair will strengthen our position significantly, especially if we can demonstrate that she's exposing Emma to the relationship in any way. Barrett expects to have that by tonight, I assured her. Excellent. Now, regarding finances, our forensic accountant has reviewed the information you provided. There are no red flags suggesting hidden assets, though we'll want to verify that Sarah hasn't been moving funds in preparation for the divorce. We spent the next hour refining our approach. The plan was methodical: gather comprehensive evidence of the affair, document my role as the stable and present parent, ensure complete financial transparency, and prepare for strategic negotiation from a position of strength, all while allowing Sarah to believe I was moving toward accepting her mature divorce proposal. When Sarah dropped Emma off that evening, she lingered in the doorway, her expression suggesting she wanted to continue our conversation from earlier in the week. I preempted her with a deliberately neutral update about Emma's homework schedule, then wished her a good evening, the perfect picture of civility without engagement. At 11:37 p.m., my secure phone buzzed with a message from Barrett: confirmation obtained, visual and audio evidence secured, meeting tomorrow to review. I slept soundly that night for the first time since Sarah's announcement, the knowledge that my countermoves were proceeding according to plan providing a cold comfort against the empty space in our bed. Sunday's meeting with Barrett exceeded my expectations. The evidence was irrefutable: time-stamped photos of Sarah and James entering and leaving the hotel room, audio recording of their conversation in the hotel lobby discussing their plans for after her divorce was finalized, even a clear image of them embracing in the parking lot. This establishes pattern and intent, Barrett explained. They've been meeting regularly for at least 3 months based on hotel records I've obtained, and the conversation clearly indicates this isn't a recent development but a relationship they've been planning to legitimize once your divorce is completed. Perfect, I said, reviewing the evidence with the same methodical attention I'd give a critical case file. I need one more thing: surveillance during Sarah's next time with Emma. I want to know if Harrington is present at any point. Barrett nodded. Already planned for their next scheduled visit. The following week established our new normal. Sarah remained at her sister's house, calling Emma daily and taking her for dinner on Wednesday evening. I maintained my role as the steadfast, present parent while continuing to build my case. Financial documents were organized, Barrett's surveillance continued, and Jessica refined our strategy based on the accumulating evidence. The critical moment came 10 days after Sarah's initial separation announcement. She called on a Thursday evening after Emma had gone to bed, her tone suggesting she was ready to move forward with more formal arrangements. I was thinking we should discuss next steps, she began. Maybe meet for coffee this weekend? Just the two of us, to talk about how we want to handle things moving forward. That seems reasonable, I agreed. Saturday morning while Emma's at her friend Sophia's birthday party? Perfect, Sarah sounded relieved. I'm glad we're approaching this constructively, Greg. I really do want what's best for everyone. Of course, I replied. That's what matters most. We agreed to meet at a cafe equidistant between our current locations. What Sarah didn't know was that I had no intention of discussing mediation or amicable separation terms. Saturday morning would be when I revealed that her mature divorce was about to become something very different from what she had planned. As I ended the call, I reviewed the substantial case we'd built: irrefutable evidence of her months-long affair, documentation of her absence from Emma's life during the separation, complete financial transparency that would prevent any hidden asset maneuvers, and a record of my stable presence as Emma's primary caregiver throughout the crisis. Sarah wanted a mature divorce on her terms, one that would allow her to transition smoothly to her new relationship while maintaining her reputation and securing favorable settlement terms. Instead, I had prepared a masterclass in methodical, strategic response that would ensure the outcome reflected true equity rather than her convenient narrative. The chess pieces were in position. Saturday would be checkmate would follow. Saturday morning arrived with a crystalline autumn clarity that seemed appropriate for what was about to unfold. I dropped Emma at Sophia's birthday party with the practiced routine we'd established: a checklist of emergency contacts, a reminder about her allergy medication, and the assurance that I'd be back to pick her up at 2 p.m. The normalcy of the interaction belied the significance of what would happen in the intervening hours. I arrived at Caffeine Connection 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. The cafe was moderately busy with weekend patrons, providing the perfect balance of ambient noise and discretion for our meeting. I ordered a black coffee and waited, my briefcase resting against the chair leg, containing everything I needed for what was to come. Sarah arrived precisely on time, dressed in the casual elegance she preferred for weekend outings: dark jeans, a cream cashmere sweater, and minimal jewelry that nonetheless managed to convey sophistication. She spotted me immediately, offering a practiced smile as she approached. "Good morning," she said, setting her purse down before heading to the counter. "I'll just grab a latte." I watched her interact with the barista, confident, warm, the perfect picture of a successful professional enjoying her weekend. No one observing would guess she was in the midst of dismantling her family while conducting an affair with her married mentor. Her performance was flawless, which had always been Sarah's particular talent, presenting exactly the image she wanted others to see. She returned with her artfully crafted drink and settled across from me, arranging her features into an expression of appropriate seriousness tempered with constructive optimism. "Thank you for meeting," she began. "I know this isn't easy, but I appreciate your willingness to discuss things civilly." "Of course," I replied, maintaining the same neutral tone I'd cultivated since her announcement. "Civility is important, especially when there's a child involved." Sarah nodded, apparently encouraged by my reasonable response. "Exactly. Emma's well-being has to be our priority through all of this." I couldn't agree more. She took a careful sip of her latte before continuing. "I've been giving our situation a lot of thought, and I believe the most straightforward approach would be to work with a mediator rather than adversarial attorneys. It would be less expensive, less contentious, and generally more mature." There was that word again, mature, her preferred framing device for what she wanted: a quick, quiet divorce that wouldn't disrupt her carefully constructed narrative or professional reputation. I've been researching mediators, she continued when I didn't immediately respond. There's one, Patricia Goodwin, who specializes in amicable divorces for professionals. She has excellent reviews for helping couples reach fair agreements without unnecessary conflict. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, setting the cup down precisely before responding. Before we discuss mediators, I think we should be clear about what we're mediating. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly. What do you mean? I mean the terms of our divorce, of course, but also the circumstances that led to it. I maintained eye contact, watching her expression carefully. For instance, how long has your relationship with James Harrington been going on? The momentary flash of shock in her eyes was quickly masked, but not quickly enough. Sarah had always excelled at controlling her expressions, but genuine surprise was harder to conceal. James? My mentor at the firm? She gave a practiced laugh. Greg, I told you this isn't about another person. James is a married colleague, nothing more. Is that why you've been meeting him at the Westbrook Grand Hotel on Thursday and Saturday evenings for the past 3 months? Professional mentorship? My tone remained conversational, as if we were discussing weekend plans rather than infidelity. Sarah's composure slipped a fraction further, a slight tensing around her mouth, a momentary freeze in her posture before she recovered. I don't know what you think you know, but you're mistaken. I've had late meetings with several colleagues, including James, but there's nothing inappropriate happening. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her explanation. Then I reached down for my briefcase, placing it on the empty chair beside me and extracting a manila folder. That's interesting, because I have time-stamped photographs of you entering and leaving his hotel room on multiple occasions, audio recordings of your conversations about your relationship, and detailed logs of your communications going back approximately 4 months. I slid the folder across the table without opening it. Sarah stared at it as if it might contain something venomous. What is this? She asked, her voice tightening despite her evident effort to maintain control. Evidence, I replied simply. Gathered legally by a licensed private investigator with extensive experience providing court-admissible documentation. There's more, of course. This is just a representative sample. Sarah didn't touch the folder, her gaze shifting from it to my face, searching for something, anger, hurt, jealousy perhaps, and finding only calm assessment. You've been spying on me? She asked, attempting to shift the dynamic by claiming moral outrage. I've been gathering information relevant to our divorce proceedings, I corrected. Just as you've been consulting with attorneys before informing me you wanted to separate. We're both being strategic, Sarah. Let's not pretend otherwise. She squared her shoulders slightly. Fine. Yes, James and I have become close. It happened after I realized our marriage wasn't working. I didn't tell you initially because I wanted to focus on our situation without complications. Interesting timeline, I observed, because the evidence suggests your relationship with James began well before you decided our marriage wasn't working. In fact, it appears your dissatisfaction with our marriage conveniently developed alongside your growing attachment to him. That's not. It's also worth noting, I continued as if she hadn't spoken, that your affair partner is married with 3 children, the youngest of whom is Emma's age. His wife, Catherine, is currently undergoing treatment for breast cancer. Did you know that? The color drained from Sarah's face. How did you? Information gathering is fundamental to effective strategy, I explained, echoing one of Sarah's favorite professional maxims back to her. I've been very thorough. Sarah took a deep breath, visibly recalculating her approach. Okay. Yes, there's a relationship with James. But that doesn't change the fact that our marriage hasn't been working for some time. The most productive path forward is still an amicable, mediated divorce where we both compromise for Emma's sake. I almost admired her composure, the quick pivot from denial to rationalization without missing a beat. In another context, it would have been an impressive display of professional adaptability. I agree that Emma's well-being should be our priority, I said. Which is why I've already filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, with a request for primary physical custody and equitable division of assets that recognizes my role as the stable parent during this transition. The shock that registered on Sarah's face was no longer fleeting but complete. You what? When? The papers were filed yesterday afternoon. You should be formally served on Monday. You can't just, that's not what we. Sarah struggled to formulate a coherent response, her carefully planned script suddenly irrelevant. Primary custody? On what grounds? On the grounds that you chose to leave the family home to pursue an extramarital relationship, disrupting Emma's stability during a critical developmental period, I explained calmly. And that you've demonstrated questionable judgment by conducting an affair with a married man whose family is in crisis, suggesting priorities that don't align with Emma's best interests. That's absurd, Sarah snapped, her composed facade crumbling further. I'm an excellent mother. The court won't. The court will review evidence showing that since you left, you've missed 4 of Emma's soccer games, forgotten her science project deadline, and been consistently unavailable during her established routine while I've maintained her schedule and provided emotional support during the upheaval you initiated. I've been giving her space to adjust. You've been at the Westbrook Grand Hotel with James Harrington while she cried herself to sleep, I corrected, allowing the first hint of emotion to color my tone. That will be documented in our filing. Sarah's expression hardened, the professional attorney emerging as her personal defenses failed. So this is how you want to play it? Scorched earth? I thought you were being reasonable. I'm being strategic, I countered. There's a difference. And I'm not the one who chose to burn our family to the ground while expecting to walk away with favorable terms. Greg, you wanted a mature divorce, I continued. What you're getting is a divorce conducted with the same level of strategic preparation and professional thoroughness that we both bring to our legal cases. The difference is that I've been preparing my case while you assumed I was processing emotional shock. Sarah stared at me, reassessing everything that had transpired since her initial announcement. I could almost see her mentally reviewing our interactions, recognizing the deliberate nature of what she had interpreted as passive acceptance. What exactly do you want? She asked finally, her voice low and controlled. Exactly what I've filed for, primary physical custody of Emma with generous visitation for you, provided it doesn't involve exposure to your affair partner while his marriage remains intact. The house, which I paid 60% of and has been Emma's stable home her entire life, and an equitable distribution of our other assets based on contribution and future needs, taking into account that I will be Emma's primary caregiver. That's not equitable, and you know it, Sarah hissed. It's precisely equitable, I countered. You're welcome to present arguments for a different arrangement to the court, but I should warn you that our filing includes comprehensive financial analysis, documentation of parenting responsibilities, and, of course, extensive evidence of your affair including its timeline relative to our separation. Sarah's eyes narrowed. You've been planning this since the moment I told you I wanted to separate. Actually, I've been monitoring the situation since I first noticed signs of your affair 6 months ago, I corrected. The active planning began the night you left. You son of a... Careful, I cautioned. We're in public, and appearances matter greatly in divorce proceedings. Documented emotional outbursts rarely help one's case for custody. She took a deep breath, visibly restraining herself. When she spoke again, her tone was controlled but icy. You won't get away with this. I have resources too. I'll fight you on every point. You're welcome to try, I acknowledged. But before you commit to that path, consider the collateral damage. A contested divorce will involve depositions, yours, mine, James's, potentially his wife's. Evidence will become public record. The partners at your firm, who have a morality clause in their partnership agreement, will be aware of the full circumstances. The other parents at Emma's school, who have been so impressed by our picture-perfect family, will know the details. I paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Or, we can negotiate terms that recognize the reality of our situation while minimizing public drama. Your choice. Sarah stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I never thought you could be this calculating. You never thought I would need to be, I corrected. But we both know that in our profession, the best outcomes go to those who prepare most thoroughly and execute most strategically. You taught me that, Sarah. She was silent for a long moment, reassessing the battlefield and recognizing the disadvantageous position she now occupied. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted from outrage to grudging recognition. What specifically are you proposing as an alternative to court? A settlement agreement with the terms I outlined, formalized through our respective attorneys rather than a mediator. You'll have full legal input and representation, but the core parameters remain non-negotiable. And if I refuse? Then we proceed to court with the full evidence package, which will be updated continuously as your relationship with James continues to develop. Sarah picked up her purse, her movements deliberate and controlled. I need to consult with my attorney. Of course, I agreed. Jessica Winters is representing me. Your counsel can contact her directly to begin discussions. Something flashed in Sarah's eyes at the mention of Jessica's name, recognition of the reputation that preceded her, perhaps, or realization of just how seriously I had prepared for this confrontation. This isn't over, she said, rising from her seat. On that we agree, I replied calmly. But the parameters have been established. I'll see you at Sophia's house at 2 p.m. for Emma's pickup. I assume you'll maintain appropriate behavior in front of the children and other parents? The reminder of our public obligations, and the implicit warning about maintaining appearances, landed as intended. Sarah gave a curt nod before turning and walking out of the cafe, her usual graceful posture now rigid with contained fury. I remained at the table after she left, sipping the last of my coffee and sending a brief text to Jessica, initial confrontation complete. Expect contact from opposing counsel within 24 to 48 hours. Her response was immediate, standing by. Evidence package prepared for filing if negotiations fail. The following week unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Sarah's attorney, a competent but not exceptional divorce lawyer from her firm's network, reached out to Jessica on Monday afternoon. Initial discussions were predictably contentious, with Sarah's side attempting to characterize my approach as vindictive and disproportionate. Jessica, true to her reputation, remained coldly factual. She presented our evidence methodically, outlining the legal and professional consequences of a public court battle versus the relative privacy of a negotiated settlement. By Wednesday, the tone had shifted noticeably from indignation to pragmatic damage control. Throughout this period, Sarah and I maintained carefully civil interactions during Emma's handoffs and necessary communications about her schedule. If Emma noticed the tension beneath our polite exchanges, she didn't mention it, though her increased clinginess when it was time to go with Sarah suggested a level of awareness that troubled me deeply. On Friday evening, 10 days after our cafe confrontation, Sarah requested to speak with me after dropping Emma home from their dinner together. I agreed, asking Emma to start her bedtime routine while we talked in the kitchen, close enough to be available if she needed anything, but with enough privacy for a frank conversation. My attorney has reviewed your proposed settlement terms, Sarah began without preamble. He believes they're punitive and one-sided. And yet they reflect the reality of our situation, I countered. Primary custody with the parent who remained in the family home, ownership of that home going to the custodial parent for stability, and asset division that acknowledges relative contribution. Standard divorce parameters adjusted for the specific circumstances. Sarah's jaw tightened briefly before she regained control. What about my relationship with Emma? Your terms restrict my time with her based on subjective judgments about my personal life. The terms restrict Emma's exposure to your affair partner while his marriage remains intact, I clarified. That's a reasonable boundary given the circumstances. Your time with Emma is otherwise generous and flexible. And the house? We purchased it together. With a 60-40 split that's reflected in the proposed settlement, you'll receive appropriate compensation for your equity. Sarah studied me with the evaluative gaze she typically reserved for opposing counsel. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've tried to be thorough, I acknowledged. Just as you would be if our positions were reversed. She didn't deny it, which was perhaps the most honest aspect of our interaction. After a moment, she asked the question that had likely been troubling her most. And the evidence you've gathered, what happens to it if I agree to your terms? It remains secured but unused, provided the agreement is honored. The surveillance has already been discontinued. How generous, she remarked, sarcasm edging her tone. It's not about generosity, Sarah. It's about establishing parameters that protect Emma while acknowledging the choices that brought us to this point. She was quiet for a moment, weighing options that had grown increasingly limited. My attorney believes we could get a more balanced outcome in court. Your attorney hasn't seen the full evidence package, I pointed out. Jessica has provided a representative sample, but the complete documentation is substantially more comprehensive. It includes timeline analysis correlating your affair with specific family events you missed, documentation of your misleading statements to both me and Emma about your whereabouts, and evidence suggesting you discussed strategies for favorable divorce terms with James before informing me you wanted to separate. Sarah's expression confirmed the accuracy of that last point, though she didn't verbally acknowledge it. Instead, she asked, "What about James? Is he included in your evidence collection?" To the extent that his actions intersect with matters relevant to our divorce, yes, I confirmed. Though his marriage and professional standing aren't my primary concern, the implicit threat wasn't lost on her. If our case went to court, James would inevitably be drawn into the proceedings, with potential consequences for both his marriage and partnership status. I'll need time to consider the terms, Sarah said finally. The offer remains open until Monday, I replied. After that, we proceed with court filings as planned. She nodded, gathering her purse with deliberate movements that betrayed the tension she was working to contain. I'll be in touch before then. After Sarah left, I went upstairs to check on Emma, finding her in bed with a book but clearly waiting for me rather than actually reading. Is Mom okay? She asked as I sat on the edge of her bed. She seemed upset. Mom and I are working through some grown-up issues, I explained, keeping my tone reassuring despite the complexity of our situation. But we both love you very much, and that's never going to change. Is she coming back home soon? The question pierced through the strategic calculations that had dominated my thinking for weeks. In that moment, I wasn't an attorney executing a carefully planned legal strategy. I was simply a father facing his daughter's confusion and pain. No, sweetheart, I answered gently. Mom and I have decided that we need to live in separate houses now, but we're figuring out exactly how that's going to work so that you feel safe and loved all the time. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this confirmation of what she had likely already understood but hoped might change. Will I still see Mom a lot? Absolutely, I assured her. You'll spend lots of time with both of us, just not at the same time anymore. And this will always be your home, with your room and your things exactly how you want them. Promise? Promise, I said firmly, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Some things are changing, but my love for you and my job as your dad to keep you safe and happy, those things will never change. She seemed satisfied with that assurance, at least for the moment. After reading another chapter of her current book together and going through our established bedtime routine, I kissed her goodnight and left her to sleep, my determination to secure the outcome I'd planned reinforced by the interaction. Sunday evening, Sarah called to inform me that she was prepared to accept the settlement terms with 2 minor modifications, a slightly more generous financial adjustment for the house equity and more flexibility in the summer visitation schedule. Both were reasonable adjustments that didn't affect the core parameters I had established. My attorney will contact Jessica tomorrow to formalize the agreement, she said, her tone professionally neutral. I assume that means the evidence you've gathered will be secured as discussed? As long as the agreement is honored, yes, I confirmed. There was a pause before she asked, did you ever consider a different approach? One that didn't involve surveillance and strategic leverage? Did you? I countered. Before consulting divorce attorneys and planning your exit with James, did you consider honest communication about whatever was missing in our marriage? The silence that followed contained more truth than anything Sarah had said since announcing our separation. For what it's worth, she said finally, I didn't expect you to respond this way. I thought you'd be hurt, angry maybe, but not tactical. I know, I replied simply. That miscalculation is why we're having this conversation instead of the one you planned. After another pause, she said, I'll have Emma ready at the usual time tomorrow for school pickup, effectively ending the personal aspect of our discussion. Thank you, I responded, allowing the conversation to return to the practical co-parenting framework that would define our interactions moving forward. The following weeks were consumed with finalizing the divorce settlement, establishing the new routines that would structure Emma's life between 2 households, and beginning the long process of healing from the abrupt dissolution of what I had believed was a solid marriage. Sarah moved into a condo closer to the city, James Harrington remained conspicuously absent from any family interactions, and Emma gradually adapted to the new reality with the resilience children often demonstrate when provided with stability and consistent reassurance. 6 months after Sarah's initial separation announcement, our divorce was finalized with the terms I had outlined. Primary physical custody remained with me in the family home, with Sarah having generous visitation that notably did not include overnight stays when James was present. The financial settlement reflected our relative contributions to our assets, and both of us maintained the professional standing that had been a central concern in Sarah's initial approach to the divorce. On the day the final paperwork was processed, Jessica called to congratulate me on the outcome. You know, most clients come to me emotional and unprepared, looking for guidance through unfamiliar territory, she remarked. You came with a complete strategy and the discipline to execute it. It's been refreshing, professionally speaking. I had motivation to be thorough, I replied, thinking of Emma sleeping peacefully in her familiar bedroom, surrounded by the stability I had fought to preserve. Well, it paid off. The outcome is exactly what we targeted, which rarely happens in divorce cases without significant compromise. After ending the call, I sat in my home office, the same room where Sarah had delivered her separation announcement 7 months earlier. The space looked different now, reorganized to reflect my preferences rather than our compromised aesthetic. The house felt different too, emptier in some ways without Sarah's presence, but more authentic without the underlying tension that I now recognized had been building for months before she left. Sarah had wanted a mature divorce, a sanitized, controlled dissolution that would allow her to transition smoothly to her new relationship while maintaining her professional reputation and securing favorable terms. What she got instead was a methodical demonstration of the consequences of underestimating an opponent and failing to anticipate countermoves. It wasn't the vindictive scorched earth approach she had accused me of pursuing. I had remained factual, strategic, and focused on legitimate objectives related to Emma's well-being and equitable asset division. But I had also refused to accept the convenient narrative and unfavorable terms she had attempted to establish, meeting her strategic opening with more comprehensive strategic response. In the end, Sarah got her divorce, just not the one she had planned. And I had given her exactly what she claimed to want, a mature approach that prioritized strategic thinking over emotional reaction. A masterclass in controlled response rather than impulsive retaliation. Revenge served cold, precise, and entirely within the boundaries of professional conduct. As I closed my laptop and went upstairs to check on Emma before turning in for the night, I reflected that the most important outcome wasn't the favorable settlement terms or the strategic victory. It was the stability I had secured for my daughter and the foundation I had preserved for rebuilding our lives after an unexpected and painful chapter. Sarah had taught me many things during our 15 years together, but perhaps the most valuable lesson came at the end. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them, and respond accordingly. 1 year after our divorce was finalized, I stood in the kitchen preparing Emma's favorite Saturday morning breakfast, blueberry pancakes with homemade whipped cream, and reflecting on how much had changed in the 18 months since Sarah had announced her desire for separation. Emma, now 13 and navigating the early stages of adolescence, had adjusted to our new family structure with remarkable resilience. She spent every other weekend with Sarah at the downtown condo, maintained her academic excellence despite the disruption, and had recently joined the debate team, perhaps an early indication that she might follow both her parents into the legal profession one day. "Something's burning, Dad," Emma announced, wandering into the kitchen in her pajamas, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. I quickly flipped the pancake that had indeed begun to darken beyond the perfect golden brown I'd been achieving with the previous batch. Crisis averted. "Good morning to you too, by the way." She grinned, hopping onto one of the counter stools. "Morning. Why are you so distracted? You never burn pancakes." "Just thinking," I deflected, sliding the slightly overdone pancake onto a separate plate for myself. "Tournament today, right? What time do we need to be at school?" "Nice subject change," Emma observed with the perceptiveness that sometimes made me forget she was still a child. 9:30. "First debate starts at 10. And your mother is meeting us there?" I confirmed, maintaining the neutral tone I always used when discussing co-parenting arrangements. Emma nodded, already reaching for the perfect pancake I'd just placed on her plate. "She said she might be a few minutes late but definitely won't miss my round." I nodded, keeping any reaction from my expression. Sarah's "few minutes late" had become a pattern, not significant enough to officially document for custody purposes, but noticeable enough that Emma had begun to anticipate it rather than being disappointed in the moment. As we ate breakfast, Emma chatted about her debate preparation and the opposing team's likely arguments. I listened attentively, offering suggestions when appropriate but mostly appreciating her growing confidence and articulation. These ordinary moments, sharing breakfast, discussing her interests, watching her develop into her own person, had become even more precious to me after nearly losing them to Sarah's carefully orchestrated exit plan. We arrived at the school auditorium at precisely 9:25. I helped Emma locate her team and coach, then found a seat in the parent section, saving one beside me for Sarah despite the voice in the back of my mind suggesting she might not arrive in time to use it. At 9:55, 5 minutes before Emma's debate was scheduled to begin, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, running about 15 minutes behind. "Traffic. Tell Emma good luck if I miss the start." I typed a brief acknowledgement, then put my phone away, focusing on Emma as she arranged her notes at the podium and exchanged last-minute strategy whispers with her debate partner. The familiar sense of pride mixed with the equally familiar disappointment on her behalf. Another moment Sarah would miss, another memory incomplete. Sarah slipped into the seat beside me 12 minutes into Emma's opening argument, slightly breathless and offering a whispered apology that I acknowledged with a brief nod. Together, we watched our daughter deliver a remarkably poised presentation on the ethical implications of artificial intelligence in healthcare, her logical structure and confident rebuttals suggesting a natural aptitude for persuasive argumentation. "She's amazing," Sarah whispered as Emma concluded her portion. "She gets that strategic thinking from you. And the dramatic flair from you," I replied, maintaining the polite cordiality that had become our standard interaction. Emma's team won their round handily, earning compliments from the judges on their thorough research and effective counter-arguments. As we gathered in the hallway afterward, Emma's smile was bright enough to momentarily erase the complexity of our family situation. She was simply a teenager enjoying success at something that mattered to her, with both parents present to witness it. "I'm so proud of you," Sarah said, hugging Emma with genuine enthusiasm. "You completely dismantled their privacy concerns argument." "Thanks, Mom," Emma beamed. "Are you staying for the next round?" "We're up again at 1 o'clock. Sarah's expression shifted subtly, the slight tightening around her eyes indicating the answer before she spoke. "I wish I could, honey, but I have a client meeting at noon that I couldn't reschedule. It's for that international merger case I told you about." Emma's disappointment was visible for only a moment before she masked it with the practiced understanding of a child accustomed to divided parental attention. "That's okay. It's a big case, I know. I'll be there for the finals next Saturday if your team advances," Sarah promised, squeezing Emma's shoulder. I kept my expression neutral despite the familiar pattern unfolding, Sarah prioritizing work over Emma's activities, offering future promises to compensate for present absences. It was exactly this behavior that had strengthened my custody position during our divorce, and it continued to validate the outcome we had reached. "I'll text you how the next round goes," Emma assured her mother, already adapting to the disappointment. After Sarah left with another quick hug and a stream of encouraging words, Emma and I headed to the cafeteria where the debate team was gathering between rounds. "You okay?" I asked as we walked. Emma shrugged with forced casualness. "Yeah. Mom's really busy with that merger. It's important." I chose my response carefully, maintaining the balanced approach I'd adopted since the separation. "Your debate is important too. But I know she's proud of you, even when she can't be here for everything." Emma nodded, and I could see her processing this in the thoughtful way that characterized her approach to our complicated family dynamic. "Dad? Can I ask you something?" "Anything," I assured her, finding an empty bench away from the crowd. "Are you dating anyone?" The question was delivered with studied nonchalance that didn't quite mask her interest in the answer. The inquiry caught me off guard, not because I hadn't considered my own romantic future, but because Emma hadn't broached the subject before. "No, not currently. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," she said, examining her debate notes with sudden intense interest. "It's been a long time since you and Mom split up." "It has," I acknowledged. "But I've been focused on making sure you're doing well with all the changes, and on rebuilding our life together in the house. Dating hasn't been a priority." Emma looked up from her papers. "Would you tell me if you were? Dating someone, I mean?" "Absolutely," I promised. "You'd be the first to know. Any potential relationship would affect you too, so you'd definitely be part of that conversation." She seemed satisfied with this answer. "Good. Because Mom didn't tell me about James until I already figured it out." The casual revelation caught me by surprise. "James? Your mother's colleague?" Emma gave me a look that bordered on teenage exasperation. "Her boyfriend, Dad. They're not exactly subtle when I'm at her place for weekends." I carefully controlled my reaction, keeping my tone neutral despite the surge of anger that Sarah had apparently introduced James into Emma's time with her despite our agreement. "How do you feel about that?" Emma shrugged again, but this time the gesture seemed less forced and more genuinely uncertain. "It's weird, I guess. He tries too hard to be nice to me, like he's auditioning or something. And he's always at Mom's condo now, even though they still pretend he's just visiting when I'm there." This was precisely the situation our custody agreement had been designed to prevent, at least until James had resolved his own marital situation appropriately. The revelation that Sarah was violating both the spirit and likely the letter of our agreement was concerning, but I kept my focus on Emma's feelings rather than the legal implications. "Has his presence made you uncomfortable in any way?" I asked carefully. "Not uncomfortable exactly," Emma clarified. "Just, I don't know. Like I'm intruding on their life instead of having time with Mom. She acts different when he's there, more worried about what he thinks than about what I want to do." I nodded, acknowledging her perception without adding any commentary that might be perceived as undermining Sarah. "Thank you for telling me. If anything about the situation ever does make you uncomfortable, promise you'll let me know right away?" "I promise," she agreed, then glanced at her watch. "I should probably find Ms. Winters and go over our strategy for the next round." "Of course," I said, standing. "I'll grab us some lunch while you prep with your team." As Emma hurried off to join her debate coach, who, in one of life's odd coincidences, shared a surname with my divorce attorney though they were unrelated, I took a moment to process what I'd just learned. Sarah was clearly violating our custody agreement by having James present during Emma's visitation. The question was how to address it without dragging Emma into adult conflicts. I sent a text to Jessica Winters, my attorney. Need to discuss potential custody agreement violation. Available Monday? Her response came quickly, 10 a.m., my office. Details? Will explain in person. Involves exposure to affair partner during visitation. After securing a brief acknowledgement from Jessica, I purchased lunch for Emma and myself, compartmentalizing my concerns about Sarah's conduct to focus on supporting Emma through her second debate round. The legal issues would wait for Monday. Today was about being fully present for my daughter's achievement. Emma's team won their second debate as convincingly as the first, securing a place in the following weekend's finals. We celebrated with ice cream on the way home, the conversation returning to normal teenage topics, her friend's drama, an upcoming science project, whether she could get highlights in her hair for her 14th birthday, a discussion I deferred with practiced parental vagueness. That evening, after Emma had gone upstairs to video chat with friends, I reviewed our custody agreement, confirming what I already knew. Sarah was explicitly prohibited from having James present during overnight visits with Emma until his own divorce was finalized and a 6-month adjustment period had passed. Given Emma's casual reference to his regular presence, it was clear Sarah had been ignoring this provision for some time. I considered my options carefully. Direct confrontation would likely lead to defensive hostility and potentially draw Emma into our conflict. Legal enforcement through court action would be effective but potentially disruptive to the stability we'd established. The strategic approach would be to document the violation thoroughly, present it to Sarah through proper legal channels, and establish consequences for continued non-compliance, all while maintaining our functional co-parenting relationship for Emma's benefit. Monday morning, I met with Jessica in her office after dropping Emma at school. Her space remained as I remembered it, elegant, intimidating, designed to communicate power rather than comfort. Jessica herself seemed unchanged as well, her professional demeanor as precise as her immaculate suit. So Sarah is violating the custody agreement, she summarized after I explained the situation. How did you discover this? Emma mentioned it casually on Saturday. Apparently James is regularly present during her weekend visits, including overnight stays. Jessica made a note on her legal pad. And how is Emma handling this exposure? She's not traumatized, I clarified, but she did express feeling like an intrusion in their life rather than the focus of her time with her mother. She also mentioned that Sarah behaves differently when James is present, prioritizing his preferences over Emma's. That's consistent with what we anticipated during the initial custody negotiation, Jessica observed. Hence the restriction in the first place. Do you have documentation beyond Emma's verbal report? Not yet, but I can gather it if necessary. Jessica tapped her pen thoughtfully. Before we pursue formal enforcement, I suggest a structured communication approach. I'll draft a letter to Sarah's attorney outlining the reported violation and requesting immediate compliance with the existing agreement. We'll include a reminder of the potential consequences for continued violation, including potential modification of the visitation schedule. I'd prefer to avoid disrupting Emma's time with her mother if possible, I noted. Despite the violations, maintaining her relationship with Sarah is important. Agreed, Jessica said. The letter will emphasize that our goal is compliance, not punishment. That said, we should be prepared for defensive response. Sarah may claim the restriction is no longer relevant or necessary given the time that has passed since your divorce. Is there legal merit to that argument? I asked. Minimal, Jessica assured me. The agreement specifies clear conditions for modifying the restriction, formal conclusion of James's divorce and a 6-month adjustment period. Unless those conditions have been met, the restriction remains legally binding regardless of time passed. We spent the next half hour outlining the communication strategy and discussing potential responses. Jessica would draft the letter that day, and I would review it before it was sent to Sarah's attorney. The approach would be firm but not antagonistic, focused on Emma's well-being rather than punitive enforcement. As I was preparing to leave, Jessica asked, "How are you doing with all of this, personally?" It can be difficult to maintain strategic focus when emotions are involved. The question caught me slightly off guard. Jessica rarely ventured into the personal realm, keeping our interactions strictly professional. I'm focused on Emma's well-being, I replied. My personal feelings about Sarah's conduct are secondary. Jessica nodded approvingly. That's the right approach. Keep that perspective if this escalates. Courts respond well to parents who demonstrably prioritize their children's interests over their own emotions. 3 days later, Sarah requested a phone call outside our usual co-parenting communication schedule. I agreed to speak after Emma was in bed, preparing mentally for what would likely be a defensive response to the letter her attorney had received that morning. I got a rather formal letter from my attorney today, Sarah began without preamble when I answered. Apparently you're concerned about James's presence during my time with Emma. I'm concerned about compliance with our custody agreement, I corrected calmly, which explicitly restricts overnight presence of either of our romantic partners until specific conditions are met. That restriction was put in place 18 months ago, Sarah countered. Circumstances have changed. Emma is comfortable with James now. That's not the impression she gave when she mentioned his regular presence, I replied. And regardless of time passed, the agreement specifies the conditions for lifting the restriction, James's divorce being finalized and a 6-month adjustment period. Have those conditions been met? Sarah's momentary silence confirmed what I already suspected. James's divorce was either ongoing or had concluded too recently to satisfy the agreement's terms. His divorce was just finalized last month, she admitted reluctantly. But Emma has known him for well over a year through my work events. The spirit of the agreement was to prevent sudden disruption, which isn't the case here. The agreement is quite specific about both the letter and spirit of the restriction, I pointed out. It's not about how long Emma has been acquainted with James, it's about providing appropriate transition time after significant relationship changes and ensuring her time with each parent is focused on that relationship rather than accommodating new partners. So what exactly are you proposing? Sarah asked, her tone shifting from defensive to pragmatic, the attorney in her recognizing the weakness of her position. Simple compliance with the existing agreement, I replied. 6 months from the formal conclusion of James's divorce before overnight stays when Emma is present. That's what we agreed to, that's what was incorporated into the court order, and that's what serves Emma's best interests during this transition. And if I believe the restriction is no longer necessary or beneficial? Then you can propose a formal modification through proper legal channels, I suggested reasonably. But until such modification is approved, the existing agreement remains in effect. Continued violation could impact future custody considerations. There was another brief silence as Sarah weighed her options. When she spoke again, her tone was measured but clearly frustrated. Fine. I'll ensure compliance with the restriction as written. But I want to revisit this issue when the 6 months have passed. That would be appropriate, I acknowledged. Our agreement includes provisions for regular review and potential modification as circumstances evolve and Emma's needs change. After a few more exchanges regarding the upcoming weekend's logistical arrangements, we ended the call. I had maintained the calm, reasonable tone that had proven effective throughout our divorce process, and Sarah had ultimately recognized the untenable nature of her position, a pattern that had become familiar in our post-divorce interactions. The following weekend, when I dropped Emma off at Sarah's condo, I noticed subtle differences that suggested compliance with our agreement. James's distinctive shoes were absent from the entryway where Emma had previously mentioned seeing them, and the second coffee mug that usually sat on the counter had disappeared. Sarah's tight smile when she greeted me confirmed that changes had been made, however reluctantly. Mom seems kind of mad, Emma observed as we rode the elevator down to the parking garage. Did something happen? Just some adjustments to the parenting schedule, I explained vaguely. Nothing for you to worry about. Emma gave me the skeptical look that increasingly reminded me of my own expression when evaluating dubious legal arguments. Is it about James? He's suddenly not staying over anymore. I considered my response carefully, balancing honesty with age-appropriate explanation. Your mom and I have an agreement about introducing new people into your routine. It's designed to make transitions easier for you. So you told her James couldn't stay over because of your agreement? Emma clarified, her perceptiveness sometimes startling for her age. I reminded her of our existing arrangement, I confirmed. It's not about controlling your mom's personal life, it's about making sure your time with each of us remains the priority. Emma processed this silently as we reached the car. Finally, she asked, is it the same for you? If you started dating someone? Exactly the same, I assured her. The agreement applies equally to both of us. That's why I haven't introduced you to anyone I've dated. Have you? Dated anyone, I mean. The direct question deserved an honest answer. I've had a few coffee meetings, yes. Nothing serious enough to involve you yet, and if that changes, we'll follow the same transition process your mom needs to follow. Emma seemed satisfied with this equity, her sense of fairness appeased by the knowledge that the same rules applied to both parents. That makes sense, I guess. The incident marked a subtle shift in my co-parenting relationship with Sarah. While she continued to fulfill her visitation obligations and participate in Emma's major events, there was a new undercurrent of careful compliance rather than collaborative engagement, the difference between following the letter of an agreement versus embracing its spirit. For her part, Emma seemed to benefit from the reinforced boundaries, reporting more focused time with Sarah during weekend visits and fewer instances of feeling like an intrusion in her mother's life. The stability of consistent expectations and enforcement had provided a framework that allowed her to navigate her relationships with both parents without being caught in the middle of adult conflicts. 3 months after the custody agreement enforcement, I received an unexpected call from Barrett Reynolds, the private investigator who had helped me gather evidence during the divorce proceedings. "Greg, I have some information you might find relevant," he began without preamble. "I was working a corporate case involving Caldwell and Bennett and came across something concerning your ex-wife." "I'm listening," I replied, closing my office door for privacy. "Sarah's being considered for partnership, but there's significant opposition from the executive committee. Apparently, her relationship with James Harrington has created ethical concerns, especially since his divorce involved allegations that their affair began while he was supervising her work on major cases." I absorbed this information without immediate reaction. "How reliable is this intel?" "Very. I have audio from a partner meeting where the issue was discussed explicitly. James is advocating for her promotion, but 3 senior partners are blocking it based on ethical conduct standards." "I see," I said carefully. "And you're sharing this because—" "Professional courtesy," Barrett replied. "You were a good client who paid promptly and didn't ask for anything questionable. This information fell in my lap during legitimate investigation for another client, and I thought you should know the professional consequences of the situation are still unfolding." After thanking Barrett for the information, I considered its implications. Sarah's career advancement, something she had always prioritized highly, was being impacted by the relationship she had chosen over our marriage. It was the definition of natural consequences, unfolding without any intervention on my part. The news didn't bring satisfaction or vindication, just a distant recognition that actions inevitably have consequences beyond the immediate aftermath. Sarah had made her choices, prioritizing her relationship with James over her marriage, her ethical obligations, and at times even her responsibilities to Emma. Those choices were continuing to shape her life, just as my choices to respond strategically rather than emotionally had shaped mine. 6 months after James's divorce was finalized, right on schedule, Sarah formally requested modification of our custody agreement to remove the restriction on overnight presence during Emma's visitation. Jessica and I reviewed the request, confirmed that the specified conditions had indeed been met, and agreed to the modification without contest, our consistent approach of reasonable compliance with properly executed legal processes. Emma, now approaching 14 and increasingly assertive about her own preferences, had adapted to our post-divorce reality with remarkable resilience. She maintained close relationships with both parents, excelled academically, and continued to develop the blend of strategic thinking and persuasive articulation that suggested a natural aptitude for the legal profession that both her parents practiced. When Sarah announced that she and James were engaged, exactly 1 week after the restriction was lifted, Emma took the news with the measured consideration that had become characteristic of her approach to our complex family situation. "How do you feel about your mom's engagement?" I asked during our Saturday morning pancake tradition, careful to maintain a neutral tone. Emma considered the question thoroughly before answering. "I'm happy she's happy, I guess. James is okay when he's not trying too hard. But I'm glad I'll still live with you most of the time. You know that won't change, right?" I assured her. "The custody arrangement remains the same regardless of your mom's marital status." "I know," Emma nodded. "You made sure everything was really clear in your agreement." Mom explained that when she told me about the engagement, the fact that Sarah had specifically referenced the custody agreement's stability during her engagement announcement suggested a growing recognition of the value of the clear boundaries we had established, a perspective shift that had taken time but ultimately benefited Emma's sense of security. That evening, as Emma worked on a school project in her room, I received a text from Sarah. "Can we discuss something related to the engagement? Available for coffee tomorrow?" I agreed to meet at a neutral location, the same cafe where we had had our confrontation about the affair 18 months earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I arrived to find Sarah already seated with 2 coffees on the table. "Thank you for meeting," she began as I took the seat across from her. "I wanted to discuss this in person rather than through attorneys." "Of course," I replied, accepting the coffee she pushed toward me, prepared exactly as I preferred it, a small detail that registered despite its insignificance. "James and I are planning to marry in June," she explained. "We'd like Emma to be part of the ceremony, as a junior bridesmaid or similar role. I wanted to discuss it with you before asking her." The consideration represented a notable shift from the Sarah who had unilaterally made decisions about our family 18 months earlier. Whether it stemmed from genuine growth or simply practical recognition of established boundaries was impossible to determine with certainty. "I appreciate you bringing this to me first," I acknowledged. "What role did you have in mind exactly, and what would it involve for Emma?" Sarah outlined the planned ceremony, tasteful, moderate in size, with Emma having a supporting role that would involve attending several pre-wedding events and participating in the ceremony itself. The timeframe worked with our custody schedule, and the responsibilities seemed appropriate for Emma's age and comfort level. "I have no objection to Emma participating if she wants to," I said after considering the details, "but it should be presented as a genuine choice, not an obligation. And her comfort should be the priority throughout the process." "Of course," Sarah agreed quickly. "I was thinking we could both talk to her together, so she knows we're aligned on this." The suggestion was another departure from past patterns, a recognition of our co-parenting relationship rather than an attempt to create separate domains. "That seems reasonable," I agreed. "When would you like to have that conversation?" We settled on the following evening, when Sarah would be picking Emma up for their regular Wednesday dinner. The discussion felt remarkably constructive compared to our interactions during the separation and divorce, perhaps a sign that the clear boundaries and strategic approach had ultimately created a framework for functional co-parenting despite the painful breakdown of our marriage. As we prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated, then said, "I know our history makes this awkward, but I want to thank you for handling Emma's needs so methodically through all of this. Your strategic approach has actually created more stability for her than my initial plan would have." The acknowledgement was unexpected, not quite an apology for the affair or the attempted manipulation during our separation, but a recognition of the effectiveness of my response. It was perhaps the closest Sarah would ever come to admitting that her mature divorce had been more self-serving than family-focused. "Emma's well-being has always been my priority," I replied simply. "That hasn't changed." Sarah nodded, understanding the implicit message, that my strategic approach had been about protecting what mattered most, not about winning for the sake of victory. "Mine too," she said, "even if my actions haven't always reflected that as clearly as they should have." We parted with the civil courtesy that had characterized our interactions since the divorce was finalized. As I watched Sarah walk toward her car, I reflected on the journey from that Tuesday evening when she had announced her desire for separation to this moment of constructive co-parenting discussion. Sarah had wanted a mature divorce on her terms, one that would allow her to transition smoothly to her relationship with James while maintaining her professional reputation and securing favorable settlement terms. What she got instead was a divorce conducted with strategic precision that established clear boundaries, protected Emma's stability, and created a co-parenting framework based on documented agreements rather than shifting emotions. It hadn't been revenge in the traditional sense of inflicting pain or punishment. It had been something more effective, a methodical demonstration that actions have consequences, that strategic preparation trumps emotional manipulation, and that true maturity lies in accepting responsibility rather than controlling narratives. As I drove home to Emma, I realized that the most significant outcome wasn't the favorable custody arrangement or the preserved family home or even the professional consequences Sarah had faced. It was the foundation we had established for Emma's future, a framework of stability, consistency, and appropriate boundaries that would serve her well as she navigated the complexities of adolescence and eventual adulthood. Sarah had wanted a mature divorce. I had given her a masterclass in strategic response instead. And Emma, the person who mattered most in this equation, was thriving as a result. 3 years after our divorce was finalized, I stood in the back of a crowded auditorium watching Emma deliver her valedictorian speech to her graduating middle school class. At 16, she had skipped a grade due to her academic excellence and now stood poised at the threshold between childhood and young adulthood, addressing her peers with the confident articulation that had become her trademark. As we move forward into high school, we carry with us not just the knowledge we've gained, but the understanding that challenges often become opportunities for growth, she was saying, her voice steady and measured. Sometimes the path we expect to follow changes unexpectedly, but how we respond to those changes defines us more than the changes themselves. The words resonated with particular significance given our family's journey over the past 4 years. I glanced to my left, where Sarah sat with James, her husband of 2 years now. We had maintained our carefully choreographed co-parenting arrangement throughout the transition, the initial tension gradually evolving into a functional working relationship focused entirely on Emma's well-being. Emma concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, her eyes finding mine briefly in the crowd, the small smile we exchanged containing volumes of shared understanding. She had grown into an impressive young woman, academically gifted, emotionally intelligent, and remarkably well-adjusted despite the disruption of her parents' divorce during her formative years. After the ceremony, we navigated the awkward but now familiar terrain of shared celebration, photos with Emma in various configurations, with me alone, with Sarah and James, with all of us together maintaining appropriate distances and civil expressions. The arrangements were so routine now that they required little conscious thought, just the practiced choreography of a post-divorce family managing public appearances. "Your speech was excellent," I told Emma as we walked toward the reception area, particularly the part about responding to unexpected changes. "I thought you might catch that," she replied with the perceptive half-smile that increasingly reminded me of my own expression. Ms. Jeffries helped me refine the wording, but the concept was mine. "It was perfectly articulated," Sarah added, joining our conversation with James following a respectful step behind. "Your debate experience really shows in your public speaking." Emma accepted the compliment with graceful confidence. "Thanks, Mom. Are we still on for celebration dinner tonight?" "Absolutely," Sarah confirmed. "Reservations at Giovanni's at 6:30. Giovanni's was Emma's favorite restaurant, an upscale Italian place where she had developed a particular fondness for their authentic risotto. The choice of venue had been agreed upon weeks earlier during one of our co-parenting planning sessions. Neutral territory with excellent food and enough ambient noise to cover any awkward conversational lulls. "I should head back to help Ms. Jeffries with the reception coordination," Emma said, always conscious of her responsibilities as student council president. "See you all at dinner?" We confirmed the arrangements, and Emma departed with the purposeful stride of someone with important tasks to complete. As she walked away, Sarah turned to me with an expression that had become familiar over the years, professional courtesy layered over the complex history we shared. "She's thriving," Sarah observed. "Top of her class, student leadership, already being recruited by the high school debate team." "She is," I agreed. "Her college counselor is already talking about early applications to top-tier schools for her senior year." James, who had maintained a careful distance from direct parenting decisions while establishing an appropriate step-parent relationship with Emma, added, "Her analytical abilities are remarkable for her age. She'd make an excellent attorney." The observation, while accurate, created a momentary tension, a reminder of the professional context where Sarah and James's relationship had begun. I acknowledged it with a neutral nod, maintaining the civil facade we had all perfected. "Emma will excel at whatever path she chooses," I replied diplomatically, "though she certainly has the logical framework for legal thinking if that's her preference." The brief exchange exemplified our current dynamic, surface-level cooperation built upon carefully maintained boundaries and strategic restraint. There were moments when I caught glimpses of Sarah's recognition that things hadn't unfolded as she had planned 4 years earlier, subtle acknowledgments that my strategic response to her mature divorce proposal had created outcomes she hadn't anticipated. That evening at Giovanni's, the 4 of us managed the celebratory dinner with the practiced ease of people who had been navigating these waters for years. Emma was the natural center of attention, her accomplishments providing safe conversational territory. We discussed her upcoming high school course selection, summer plans that accommodated our shared custody schedule, and her growing interest in constitutional law, a subject that allowed all 3 adults at the table to contribute from our professional perspectives without venturing into personal territory. As dinner concluded and Emma excused herself briefly to greet friends from her class dining across the restaurant, Sarah leaned slightly toward me, lowering her voice. "There's something we need to discuss regarding the summer schedule," she said. "Perhaps we could speak privately for a moment?" I nodded, and we stepped away from the table toward a quiet corner near the restaurant's entrance. James remained seated, his attention deliberately focused on his coffee cup, another element of our choreographed interactions. "James has been offered a position with the London office," Sarah explained once we were out of earshot. "A 2-year assignment starting in September. It's a significant opportunity for his career, and we're planning to accept." I absorbed this information, immediately calculating its implications for our custody arrangement. "I see. And how does this affect Emma?" "That's what we need to discuss," Sarah continued. "Obviously, my primary residence would shift to London if I accompany James. I'd like to propose modifications to our custody schedule to accommodate this change while ensuring Emma's stability isn't disrupted." "What specifically are you suggesting?" I asked, maintaining a neutral expression despite the significance of what she was proposing, a major geographical change that would inevitably impact our established arrangements. Several options, Sarah replied in the measured tone she used for legal negotiations. Emma could remain primarily with you during the school year, with extended visits to London during breaks and summer. Alternatively, she could come to London for a semester as an educational experience, or we could explore international schools if she wanted a longer stay. I recognize this requires significant discussion and consideration of Emma's preferences. The approach was notably different from the unilateral decision-making Sarah had attempted during our separation, a recognition, perhaps, of how effectively I had established boundaries around Emma's well-being. I appreciate you bringing this to me directly rather than through attorneys, I acknowledged. This is certainly a significant change that requires careful consideration. Have you discussed any of this with Emma yet? No, Sarah said immediately. I wanted to speak with you first so we could approach her together with clear options rather than creating anxiety about uncertainty. Another departure from past patterns, prioritizing Emma's emotional security over personal convenience or advantage. Whether this represented genuine growth or simply recognition of established expectations was impossible to determine with certainty, but the result benefited Emma regardless of motivation. That's the right approach, I agreed. Let's schedule time to discuss this thoroughly without Emma present, then develop a unified presentation of options for her consideration. We agreed to meet the following week at my office, neutral professional territory, and return to the table just as Emma rejoined us. The rest of the evening proceeded without reference to the impending discussion, maintaining the celebration's focus on Emma's achievement. Later that night, after returning home with Emma, I considered the implications of Sarah's news while my daughter got ready for bed. The prospect of Sarah relocating to London represented both challenges and opportunities for our co-parenting arrangement. While it would inevitably reduce Emma's in-person time with her mother, it might also create clearer boundaries and more focused quality time during visits, potentially addressing the attention issues Emma had occasionally mentioned regarding Sarah's divided focus. From a strictly strategic perspective, Sarah's relocation would likely strengthen my position as the stable, consistent parent in Emma's life, a role I had established through methodical documentation and unwavering presence since the separation. But I had long since moved beyond viewing our co-parenting relationship as a competition to be won. What mattered now was finding the arrangement that best supported Emma's continued development and emotional security. Dad? Emma's voice interrupted my thoughts as she appeared in the doorway of my home office. Is everything okay? You and Mom seemed intense when you were talking by the door. Emma's perceptiveness had only sharpened with age. Very little escaped her notice, especially regarding the careful dynamics between her parents. I considered how to respond, balancing honesty with appropriate boundaries around adult decisions. Your mom mentioned some potential changes to her work situation, I explained. Nothing urgent or concerning, just something we'll need to discuss together as a family soon. Emma studied my expression with the evaluative gaze she had inherited from both her attorney parents. Is it about London? I overheard James talking about it on the phone last weekend. I shouldn't have been surprised by her awareness. Emma had developed an almost preternatural ability to gather information, a skill that would serve her well if she pursued the legal career she seemed increasingly inclined toward. Yes, it involves a potential move to London, I confirmed, seeing no benefit in denying what she already knew. But nothing has been decided, especially regarding how it might affect your schedule. Your mom and I are meeting next week to discuss options before talking with you about it. Emma nodded, processing this information. I'd been thinking about it since I overheard James. I'm not sure I'd want to move to London during high school, but visiting could be cool. They have amazing debate programs at some of the British schools. Her measured response reflected the maturity she had developed navigating our post-divorce family structure, an ability to consider major changes logically while acknowledging emotional aspects without being overwhelmed by them. Your preferences will be an important part of any decision, I assured her. Your mom and I both want to make sure any changes work for your education and well-being. I know, Emma said simply. You've always been good about that part, both of you. Even when things were complicated. The observation contained more insight than she likely realized, recognition of the consistent focus on her needs that had been maintained despite the significant conflict that had characterized her parents' separation. Whatever else had happened between Sarah and me, we had successfully protected Emma from the worst of it, establishing a framework that prioritized her stability. The following week, Sarah and I met in the conference room at my law firm, the neutral professional setting helping to maintain the appropriate focus on logistical planning rather than emotional complications. We spent 2 hours outlining potential arrangements, weighing educational implications, discussing practical travel considerations, and developing a structured approach to presenting options to Emma. I'm thinking primarily of Emma's stability during these critical high school years, I explained as we reviewed the calendar. Moving between countries during the academic year could disrupt her educational continuity and extracurricular development. Sarah nodded. I agree. That's why I'm leaning toward the option where she maintains her primary residence with you during the school year, with extended visits to London during breaks. We could schedule regular video calls to maintain consistent contact between visits. That seems most practical, I acknowledged. Though we should present multiple options to Emma and genuinely consider her preferences. She's mature enough to have meaningful input on decisions that affect her daily life. Of course, Sarah agreed. She's always been remarkably level-headed about these things. The discussion continued with a focus on specific scheduling, communication protocols, and contingency planning that reflected our shared professional training. By the end of the meeting, we had developed 3 potential arrangements to present to Emma, each maintaining her educational stability while accommodating varying levels of international experience. There's one more thing we should discuss, Sarah said as we prepared to conclude. Financial arrangements for the international travel. The current agreement doesn't address this specifically. I'm prepared to cover half of Emma's travel expenses, I offered reasonably. The opportunity in London benefits your family unit, but facilitating Emma's relationship with both parents remains our shared responsibility. Sarah appeared momentarily surprised by the straightforward offer, perhaps expecting more negotiation given the circumstances. That's very reasonable. Thank you. We're well past the point of using financial matters as leverage, I observed. Emma's relationship with both of us is what matters here. Sarah studied me with a thoughtful expression. You've been consistently reasonable throughout all of this, even when you had every right not to be. I haven't acknowledged that enough. The statement wasn't quite an apology for the affair or the attempted manipulation during our separation, but it represented a level of recognition that had been absent in our earlier interactions. I accepted it with a professional nod, maintaining the boundaries that had served our co-parenting relationship effectively. I've always been focused on Emma's well-being, I replied simply. That hasn't changed. 2 days later, we presented the options to Emma during a carefully structured conversation in my living room. She listened attentively as we outlined the potential arrangements, asking insightful questions about educational implications and logistical details that reflected her analytical mind. I think I'd prefer to maintain my primary residence here with Dad during the school year, she concluded after consideration, with extended visits to London during breaks and summer. I'd like to participate in the international debate tournament they host in Oxford if possible. Her preference aligned with the arrangement Sarah and I had independently identified as most practical, suggesting we had accurately assessed our daughter's priorities. The ease with which this significant change was navigated reflected how far our co-parenting relationship had evolved from the contentious beginning, from strategic conflict to functional collaboration centered on Emma's needs. In the months that followed, we developed detailed implementation plans for the new arrangement. Sarah and James relocated to London in September as scheduled, and Emma maintained her academic excellence and extracurricular involvement while adjusting to regular video calls with her mother and planned visits during school breaks. The transition proceeded more smoothly than might have been expected, largely due to the stable foundation we had established through consistent boundaries and clear expectations. Emma's first visit to London during winter break proved successful, with Sarah arranging tours of legal institutions and a meeting with a prominent barrister that aligned with Emma's growing interest in international law. As our new arrangement settled into routine, I found myself reflecting on the journey from that Tuesday evening when Sarah had announced her desire for separation to our current functional co-parenting relationship spanning international boundaries. The strategic approach I had adopted in response to her mature divorce proposal had established parameters that continued to structure our interactions years later: clear boundaries, documented agreements, and unwavering focus on Emma's well-being. One evening, as Emma and I prepared dinner together during her first weekend home from her winter London visit, she asked a question that caught me by surprise. "Dad, are you ever going to get married again?" I paused in the midst of chopping vegetables, considering how to respond. At 47, I had established a comfortable life centered on my legal practice and co-parenting Emma. I had dated occasionally over the years, including a more serious 6-month relationship the previous year with another attorney, but hadn't prioritized romantic partnership. "I'm open to the possibility," I replied honestly. But it would need to be the right person and the right circumstances, especially considering how it might affect you. I'm almost 17, Emma reminded me with the slightly exasperated tone teenagers reserve for parents who haven't noticed their maturity. You don't need to make decisions based on me anymore. Your well-being will always be a factor in my major life choices, I clarified. That's part of being a parent. But you're right that the considerations change as you get older. Emma was quiet for a moment as she continued setting the table. I think you should consider dating more actively. You seem happy with your life, but sometimes I think you're lonely. The observation reflected her increasing awareness of adult emotional complexities, seeing beyond her own needs to recognize her parent as an individual with distinct emotional requirements. What makes you think I'm lonely? I asked, genuinely curious about her perception. You've built your life around your work and me, she said thoughtfully. That was probably necessary after everything with Mom, but it's been 4 years, Dad. It's okay to want someone for yourself, not just to be my father. The insight was surprisingly mature, forcing me to consider whether I had indeed used my focus on Emma's stability as justification for avoiding emotional vulnerability. The strategic approach that had served me so well in responding to Sarah's betrayal had perhaps become habitual rather than necessary as circumstances evolved. I'll give it some thought, I promised, appreciating her concern while maintaining appropriate parent-child boundaries. But my life is genuinely fulfilling with my practice and our relationship. Any additional partnership would need to enhance that foundation, not simply fill a perceived gap. Emma seemed satisfied with this response, and the conversation shifted to her experiences in London and upcoming school projects. But her observation lingered with me, prompting reflection on how the events of 4 years earlier had shaped my approach to relationships beyond co-parenting with Sarah. 2 months later, during a professional conference in Chicago, I encountered Catherine Devlin, a corporate attorney from Boston whose presentation on international business ethics had impressed me enough to initiate a conversation during the subsequent networking reception. Our professional discussion evolved into dinner, which led to continued communication after returning to our respective cities. Unlike previous casual dating experiences since my divorce, my connection with Catherine developed with deliberate pace and mutual recognition of our established lives. At 45, she had a successful legal career, grown children from her previous marriage, and the self-awareness that comes from navigating major life transitions. Our relationship progressed through thoughtful conversations, weekend visits, and gradual integration into each other's professional and personal spheres. 6 months into our relationship, as Catherine prepared to meet Emma during her spring break return from visiting Sarah in London, I found myself considering the parallels and contrasts with my former marriage. Where Sarah and I had moved quickly from initial attraction to marriage, Catherine and I were building connection with measured consideration. Where my relationship with Sarah had ultimately revealed fundamental differences in values regarding commitment and honesty, my developing relationship with Catherine demonstrated consistent alignment in our approaches to professional ethics, personal integrity, and direct communication. I'm looking forward to meeting Emma, Catherine said during our phone conversation the evening before her arrival for the weekend. From everything you've shared, she sounds like a remarkable young woman. She is, I confirmed. And she's been surprisingly encouraging about my dating life. In fact, she's been more proactive about it than I have. Catherine laughed softly. Children often have more insight into their parents' needs than we give them credit for. My son was the one who convinced me to start dating again 3 years after my divorce. Emma suggested I was using my focus on her stability as an excuse to avoid potential vulnerability. I admitted. She might not have been entirely wrong. Strategic protection extending beyond its necessary timeframe? Catherine suggested perceptively, demonstrating the insight that had drawn me to her initially. Something like that, I acknowledged. The approach that served me well during the divorce perhaps became habitual rather than intentional as circumstances evolved. That's a common pattern, Catherine observed without judgment. Successful strategies become comfortable, even after they've served their purpose. The challenge is recognizing when protection has become limitation. The observation resonated with my own emerging awareness. The strategic approach I had adopted in response to Sarah's betrayal had established necessary boundaries and secured Emma's stability during a critical transition. But maintaining those same protective barriers around my own emotional life had perhaps prevented growth that was now possible precisely because of the foundation that had been established. When Emma returned from London the following day, her meeting with Catherine unfolded with the comfortable ease of two intellectually compatible people discovering shared interests. They connected over discussions of international law, feminist perspectives on corporate governance, and the practical challenges of maintaining work-life balance in demanding legal careers. I like her, Emma declared later that evening after Catherine had departed for her hotel. She's substantive. And she doesn't try too hard to impress me. High praise indeed, I noted with a smile, recognizing Emma's reference to James's early attempts to win her approval. She challenges you intellectually, Emma continued with her characteristic perceptiveness. I can see it in how you engage with her. It's different from how you interact with other attorneys at firm events. She has a unique perspective that I find valuable, I acknowledged, impressed by Emma's observation. Good, Emma said decisively. You deserve someone who sees you completely, not just the parts that are convenient or impressive. The comment carried more insight than Emma likely realized, an unconscious reference, perhaps, to Sarah's selective appreciation of aspects of my character that served her purposes while overlooking others that didn't align with her narrative. It was precisely this comprehensive seeing and being seen that characterized my developing relationship with Catherine, an authentic connection based on mutual recognition rather than strategic presentation. Over the following year, as Emma completed her junior year of high school with continued academic excellence and Catherine and I navigated the complexities of a long-distance relationship between our respective cities, I found myself gradually shifting from strategic protection to intentional vulnerability in ways that would have seemed inconceivable in the immediate aftermath of Sarah's betrayal. The change wasn't about forgetting or dismissing the lessons learned through that painful experience, the importance of evidence over narrative, boundaries over accommodation, strategic thinking over emotional reaction. Rather, it was about applying those lessons appropriately in their proper context while recognizing when different approaches might better serve current circumstances. When Sarah returned from London for Emma's 18th birthday celebration, a carefully planned event that accommodated our established co-parenting protocols, I introduced her to Catherine with the professional courtesy that had characterized our interactions since the divorce. Sarah's momentary surprise at meeting my serious partner quickly gave way to appropriate social engagement, though I noticed her studying our interaction with evident reassessment of her assumptions about my post-divorce life. Later in the evening, while Emma was opening gifts with her friends in the living room, Sarah approached me in the relative privacy of the kitchen with the measured expression she used for potentially sensitive conversations. Catherine seems impressive, she observed neutrally. How long have you been seeing each other? About 18 months, I replied, maintaining the factual approach that had served our co-parenting relationship effectively. She's based in Boston, so we've been navigating distance alongside other considerations. Sarah nodded, absorbing this information. Emma clearly approves. I haven't seen her engage so enthusiastically with an adult in my orbit since before our separation. The comparison was telling, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of Emma's complicated relationship with James despite years of cohabitation and Sarah's efforts to integrate him into family dynamics. Emma and Catherine connected immediately over shared interests, I explained simply. Their relationship has developed naturally without pressure or expectation. You've always been good at that, Sarah noted after a moment, creating space for authentic relationships to develop rather than manufacturing particular outcomes. The observation contained more insight than our typical exchanges, suggesting reflection on our divergent approaches during and after our marriage. Whether it represented genuine growth or simply recognition of contrasting methods was impossible to determine with certainty, but the acknowledgement itself marked a shift in Sarah's perspective. It's been important to me that Emma forms her own connections based on genuine compatibility rather than obligation, I replied, the statement applicable beyond the immediate context of Catherine to our broader co-parenting approach. Sarah seemed about to respond when Emma called for her to join the gift opening in the living room. The moment passed, our brief exchange returning to the practiced co-parenting choreography that had become familiar over the years. As Emma's senior year progressed, with college applications submitted to prestigious universities and her 18th birthday receding in the rearview mirror, the parameters of our co-parenting relationship evolved to accommodate her increasing independence. Sarah's assignment in London was extended for another year, but Emma's visit schedule adjusted to align with her college preparation timeline and growing social commitments. Through these transitions, the foundation established during those critical early days after Sarah's betrayal continued to provide stability, clear documentation, consistent boundaries, and strategic focus on Emma's well-being rather than adult conflict. What had begun as my masterclass in controlled response to Sarah's mature divorce proposal had evolved into a functional framework that served all parties, particularly Emma, as she prepared for her own transition to adult independence. On the evening after Emma received her acceptance to Yale Law School's undergraduate program, her first-choice destination for beginning her anticipated legal education pathway. We celebrated with a small dinner gathering that included Catherine, who had flown in specifically for the occasion. Sarah participated via video call from London, the international co-parenting arrangement we had established continuing to function effectively despite the distance. As I watched Emma describe her anticipated course of study with characteristic articulation and thoughtful planning, I reflected on the journey from that Tuesday evening in my home office 4 years earlier. Sarah had wanted a mature divorce on her terms, a sanitized, controlled dissolution that would allow her to transition smoothly to her new relationship while maintaining her professional reputation and securing favorable settlement terms. What she received instead was a divorce conducted with strategic precision that established clear boundaries, protected Emma's stability, and created a co-parenting framework based on documented agreements rather than shifting narratives. The approach hadn't been about vengeance or punishment but about methodically ensuring outcomes that reflected true equity rather than convenient manipulation. In the years since, those boundaries and expectations had provided the foundation for Emma's remarkable resilience and achievement despite the significant disruption to her family structure. They had established parameters that allowed Sarah and me to transition from adversarial positioning to functional collaboration focused on our shared commitment to Emma's well-being. And they had created space for me to eventually build a new relationship based on authentic connection rather than strategic presentation. My response to Sarah's betrayal and manipulation hadn't been the emotional retaliation she might have anticipated, but something far more effective, a masterclass in strategic thinking that established consequences through methodical documentation rather than vindictive action. The revenge, if it could be called that, lay not in inflicting pain but in refusing to accept a narrative that prioritized convenience over truth, appearance over reality. As Emma concluded her description of Yale's unique approach to pre-law education, her eyes bright with anticipation for this next chapter, I recognized that the most significant outcome of my strategic response wasn't the favorable custody arrangement or the preserved family home or even my own eventual personal growth. It was the foundation we had established for Emma's future, a framework of stability, consistency, and appropriate boundaries that had allowed her to thrive despite circumstances that might have derailed a less secure child. Sarah had wanted a mature divorce. I had given her a masterclass in strategic response instead. And Emma, the person who mattered most in this equation, had received the gift of stability that allowed her remarkable potential to flourish unimpeded by adult conflict, perhaps the most meaningful victory of all.